Hi everyone, thanks for joining us this morning for our last workshop of 2020. Anna Caig will be sharing her wisdom on creating a marketing strategy for online book promotion. But before I hand over, just a couple of housekeeping bits from me. The session will run for an hour and a half with plenty of time for questions at the end. So please do post your questions in the chat box throughout the session and we'll come to them at the end. If you have connection problems, please click the reconnect button at the top. If that doesn't quite work, then you can leave the session and rejoin via the link emailed to you. Just one final thing from me, as I'm sure you'll know, we're fundraising for the Authors Contingency Fund to help authors affected by the pandemic. This session is free for SOA members and we welcome donations to the fund. The link is at the top of the chat. Thanks so much. I'll hand over to Anna now and disappear off screen until the end. Thanks, Anna.
Oh, thanks so much, Francesca. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. It's really lovely to see so many of you joining this morning, and thank you for the comments. A few familiar names there. So good morning. I hope you're really well. So my name is Anna Caig. I've worked in communications and marketing for 17 years, and I also teach on the journalism master's course at the University of Sheffield. But alongside my career, my whole life, really, my biggest passion has been reading and writing my own fiction. So my approach to the training that I deliver is really about taking good, solid, professional marketing techniques and principles and applying those in a way that works for creative people, in particular writers. I know how daunting it can feel. I understand, it's a completely different set of skills between the very sort of introverted, insular business of writing a book, and then when you come to promote that book and try and find an audience and readers for it. So really, I try and demystify the whole process, break it down into the different component parts and the different stages in a way that seems to work really well for creative people, in particular authors. So that's me, that's where I'm coming from. And today what I'm going to be talking to you about is how to create a marketing strategy for your book promotion, and really focusing on online channels. So using online methods of reaching the target audiences for your work. So that's what we are going to be looking at today. We've got quite a lot to cover and I do want to leave some time for, thank you, Francesca. Sometimes when I've got a really dense slide, Francesca's going to kind of move me to a different area of the screen. So we'll keep you on your toes by popping up in different places. So yeah, I do really want to try and leave some time for questions at the end. So yeah, we'll try our very best to get through all of this content today. So the first thing to really talk to you about is what do I mean by a marketing strategy? And really, this is the structure of all of your book marketing and book promotion and the way you promote yourself as an author. So it's the structure and it's the bigger picture of how all of this activity and all of this work that you do to promote yourself, how it all works together, bringing it focus, bringing it some organization, and just making sure that you are using your time efficiently and doing the right things to achieve what you want to achieve. And what we want to get to here, I know that a lot of authors feel like this when you're trying to sell your books, find readers for your books. It can feel like you're having to beg people, and it can also feel like you are a bit lost in a crowd of other authors and other books, trying to get heard, trying to get seen, trying to cut through and find your readership. And a really good marketing strategy will take you from that situation to a situation where you're making authentic, meaningful connections with people who are really going to enjoy and appreciate your writing. It's not about having to beg them. These are people that are going to want to read your books and really welcome the opportunity to buy your books. So that's the aim. That's what we want our marketing strategy to get us to. And these are the different elements of a marketing strategy. So don't worry too much about making loads of notes. I will make the slides available to you. And what we're going to do today is we're going to go through each of these component elements of a marketing strategy. And as I say, when it comes to the channels and the ways that you're going to reach your audiences, we're really going to have a bit of a focus on online channels. So that's the plan for today. The first thing to do at the outset of putting together a marketing strategy is really think about your objectives. What are the things that you want to achieve, and why are you doing this book promotion? Now, it may be that it is all about sales, and you just want to sell as many copies of your books as possible, and that's absolutely fine. It may be that you're wanting to kind of build a bit of a platform that you can later use as a launch pad for sales, and you're wanting to kind of build your author profile, build some awareness of you as a writer, and that's fine too. It may be that you're wanting to build a community around your work and really engage with your readers and potential readers. All of these are perfectly good objectives, or you may have a different objective that you want to achieve. The important thing is to be really clear with yourself. This is what I want to do. This is why I'm doing it. This is what success looks like for me when I come to the end of this activity. If it's worked well, this is what I will have achieved. Thank you. So I'm sure a lot of you in your professional lives will have had to put together smart objectives, but it is worth having a bit of a think about making your objectives as specific as you can. Being able to measure them is important, because we need to know what's working and what isn't working. It's absolutely fine to try new things. In fact, you know, innovation is a really good thing with book marketing and promotion. But you should track what's working for you and what isn't, and in order to do that, you do need to be able to measure. There is some type, if possible, either by based on your own experience or by talking to other authors and benchmarking, it's good to make your objectives as achievable and realistic as you can. Having said that, if you're embarking on doing something new, there will sometimes be an element of guesswork in terms of what is feasible for you to achieve, and that's fine. Ultimately, your objectives exist for you. No one's going to be checking up on you. I'm not going to be knocking on your door, you know, telling you off if you haven't achieved these objectives. So it's really about bringing focus to what you're doing. So just setting yourself a target that feels achievable to you is important to do at the outset of putting together a marketing strategy. So once you've identified what it is that you want to do, the next stage in the process is a very important stage, and I would really advise you to spend a little bit of time on identifying your target audiences. Now, the marketing terminology for this is audience segmentation, but really all that means is just grouping together people in any way that will help you reach them and target them as a group in a way that's helpful and meaningful. So I've got lots of examples here of ways that you can segment and target your audiences. You can do it by demographic elements like age and gender. Life stage can be quite an interesting one. Do you write books that will really appeal to people with a young family, for example? Do you think there are things about your books that mean they will appeal to empty nesters and people whose children have recently left home? Geography is a great one for authors. Where is your book set? Where do you live? And those are both ways that you can think about the people who are likely to be interested in your books. And a really big one is personal interests and lifestyle. So people like to read books that contain things that they their hobbies, their interests, the things that they're interested in. So some really good ways for authors to segment audiences. Think about the also likes. So imagine this is if other authors are likely to share a similar readership to your books, you can use that as a way of targeting an audience. As I say, think about the setting of your book. So people like to read books set in places local to them. But another really lovely way you can use geographical location is if your book's set somewhere where people might go on holiday. So I've worked with several authors now whose books are set in places like Derbyshire, the Yorkshire Dales, where people go on holiday. And again, people love to read books set in the place they're on holiday. So that's another audience segment that you can target. Think about the content of your book. Is one of your main characters a gardener? Is a lot of your book set in a garden? That's a lovely audience segment for you, you know. And you can choose audience segments based on the content of your book, but you can also choose audience segments based on you as an author. So have a bit of a think. You know, it may be that you want to have an audience segment based on the place you live. If that's different from where your book is set, that's a really good, valid way to target an audience. Think about your own professional background and interests. You know, it can work even if it's not something that there's a huge amount of content in your book relating to your own professional background. People are really interested in people who share the same background as themselves, who've gone on to write a book, and you can use that as a way of targeting your audience. So what I'm kind of getting at here is what I'd really encourage you to do is think about ways of targeting your audience which are not all about the book community and the book loving community. So this is just a tweet that was shared by a book reviewer about the amount of posts that they received in 1 week. And if you think back to the picture of the big crowd, this is what can happen. And if you solely promote your books in spaces, whether it's, you know, in person or online, that are all about the book community and the book loving community, this is what you're up against. So I would really encourage you to think about ways to segment and target your audiences that are not based on their love of books. Nobody only likes books, so think a little bit outside of the box here. They may be what we like the most, but nobody only likes books. And how else can you segment and target your audiences? And I'd really encourage you to kind of, I'm not going to pause here to do the exercise just in the interest of time, because we've got so much to go through. But when you reach this point in writing your own marketing strategy, I would really encourage you to kind of pause here and spend a good amount of time thinking laterally, thinking creatively about the content of your book, about the elements of your own life that you can bring in and use as ways of targeting audiences. And just spending a bit of time on this at the outset will really stand you in good stead. Then it's worth, when you're doing this exercise and thinking about your own target audiences, it's really worth thinking about what you know about these audiences, because the next stage is going to be thinking about channels and the ways that you have of reaching them, and then the types of content and the messages that are going to be really engaging to those audiences. So the more you know about them, the more insight that will bring, which will help you identify channels and will give you a really good head start with your key messages and your content. And this, I just thought this was so brilliant. This is an evidence review that the Arts Council put together earlier this year. And in terms of audience insight and the reasons why people read for pleasure, and I think this is equally applicable, you know, even if you write non-fiction, the reasons why people read, they've done this research, and it's almost like a bit of a menu, you know. Think about, do your books bring people entertainment and escape? Do your books really make people do that kind of cognitive work to think through what's happening in your story? Is it all about emotional stimulation? Do you make your readers feel a lot of empathy? You know, is it that what would I have done? What should this character have done? Is it about the ethical contemplation, or is it purely about the pleasure of companionship? So it's worth thinking about these reasons why people read for pleasure, because you'll be able to bring that into your audience insight. This is you know, I think even if you're not a massive geek like me, it's an absolute goldmine of information in terms of audience insight, this review. It's available on the internet for free. So I would recommend you have a read if this is something that interests you. So we have our objectives. We know what it is we want to achieve here. We've identified audience segments and target audiences of people who are likely to be interested in our books for a variety of different reasons. The next stage is really to make sure that you are focused and targeting these audiences in the right, with the right channels, and thinking about the different ways you have of reaching your audiences. So all a channel is a way of talking to an audience. So, you know, a conversation you have with somebody is a channel. There's a number of different channels here. And as I say, today is really going to be about focusing on online channels. And what I'm also going to do is try and focus on channels, as I say, that are not necessarily always all about the book community and the book loving community. You know, there's lots of examples here about ways that you can target audiences in quite traditional book community spaces, and that's absolutely fine. There's lots of really nice ways you can do that, but I wanted to focus today on talking to you about some of the other ways that you can target audiences online. And I'm also going to primarily focus on channels that mean you don't have to pay. So if you're wanting to do your book marketing and promotion without putting a lot of budget behind that, that's what I'm going to focus on today. There are obviously a lot of ways that you can put a little bit of budget into something, and I will touch on that, and pay for some advertising, but there's also plenty you can do without that. So what do I mean about less crowded and competitive channels? So these are just some examples of what I mean by this. Think about special interest communities on social media. So think back to your list of target audiences. You know, was one of your audiences people who are really interested in gardening, for example? There will be special interest communities on different social media platforms related to that specific interest. Largely on Instagram and Twitter, they will be organized around hashtags, and on Facebook, you want to be thinking about groups, and we'll talk a bit more about Facebook groups a bit later on. So it's really helpful when thinking about promoting yourself on social media. Don't think of, you know, Facebook, for example, as this kind of big homogenous mass of people. every social media platform is a collection of different communities, and they will cross over. But it's quite helpful to think in that way. You're not targeting, everyone on Instagram, for example. You're targeting specific communities of people on Instagram. So a really popular way to promote, in particular, a new book is doing a book blog tour, but think about blogs for other subject matter. So, for example, if you're a historical writer, could you work with bloggers who blog about history local to the area where your book is set, for example? That can work quite well. So thinking about working with bloggers, not necessarily book bloggers, and kind of approaching that in quite a lateral way can be a nice way to do that. And one thing to bear in mind when you're doing your audience segmentation and doing your audience targeting is really to drill down and be as specific and be as niche as you can. It can feel quite counterintuitive to do that. I think we all want to write a book, don't we, that appeals to everyone. But that's never the case. And actually, the more specific you can be. So an example would be, if you write historical fiction, don't just target people who are interested in history. Target people who are interested in the specific period of history that you write about. It's much easier to take a kind of really specific niche audience segment and broaden that out than it is to appeal to a really big group of people. And with a lot of this stuff, when we'll go on to talk about it, particularly if you are a fairly early career writer, just starting to build your following and build your platform, I really would recommend you focus on quality over quantity. People who are going to be really interested and really into what you're doing, get them on board, and then it will snowball and it will grow from there. If you try and target too broad an audience segment, you're just not going to have the same appeal. It's not going to have that kind of, oh, wow, that book really sounds like it's absolutely my cup of tea, which you will get if you're targeting the right people. It's also worth having a think about the media. So that might not necessarily spring to mind if you're thinking about online book promotion, but a lot of the media are really focused on their online content now. And a lot of the audience segments that we've talked about in relation to the subject matter of your book and special interest groups, there will be trade media for those groups that you might be able to use for your book promotion. So in terms of online channels that you can use, your own author website will act as a hub for a lot of your communications. So you'll find that if you've got a website, that's what you'll refer people back to with a lot of your other comms. It gives excuse me, a real sense of credibility. If someone searches for you online and you've got a really nice looking website, that brings a lovely credibility to you as an author. You're in control of what you put on your website. You're not at the mercy of an algorithm. And a really important element of a lot of websites is that it will act as a place for you to collate and collect email signups for your mailing list. If you're an author who manages your own sales, you can do that through your website. And a lot of website platforms will allow you to have a space where you build your own community, if that's something that you'd like to do. And if you don't have your own author website and it's something that you would like to consider doing yourself, there's just a couple of ideas there of platforms that you can use. What I would say is, if you're doing it yourself, I would really recommend that you err on the side of simplicity. And if in doubt, kind of put less information on your website rather than more. Nothing says I've done this myself and I'm an amateur like clutter. So, a really nice, clean, simple website that you can do that yourself relatively easily, but don't try and put all the information in the world on that website if you're doing it yourself. And as I say, building your mailing list will be one of the most important things you do in terms of your online book marketing and promotion. You know, again, you're in control of the information that goes out to your mailing list. It gives you real longevity in terms of your relationships with your readers. If you think back to your objectives, if your objective is to get a reader to buy a book, that's great, they've bought a book, but then you don't have a way of contacting them again necessarily. Whereas if you've captured that person's email address, you have that long-term relationship with them. You can contact them about multiple projects with multiple messages. So it's a really good way of nurturing and cultivating advocates for your work. Do think about an incentive. Why should people want to sign up to your mailing list? But what I would say on this, you know, people love a freebie, and that's great. But as with a lot of this stuff, as I said, think about quality over quantity. What you're aiming for with your mailing list is really attracting people who are going to be so into what you're doing. They're going to absolutely love it. So, you know, offering them exclusive insight and information, exclusive first looks at what you're doing. It may not be quite as kind of shiny and a lovely freebie, but it will attract the right people. So, you know, I would always say it's better to have a couple of hundred people who are really into what you're doing, and will stick with you and be really interested in the long term, than it is to attract thousands of people who've only signed up for a freebie and aren't really interested. So give that a bit of thought in terms of what you want your incentive to be. And again, if this isn't something that you've set up yet and it's something that you'd like to look at, there's a few ideas for platforms you can use there. So now we're going to have a bit of a chat about social media and some different social media platforms and the types of content that you can use on social media. But the first thing to say is really think about why you're using social media and why you're using a particular platform. I think more than any other area. Sorry, is that I just got a bit of a notification. I'll just carry on. Hopefully everything's okay. I think more than any other area of book marketing and promotion, social media is where you get this kind of, oh, you know, you really should be on Twitter, you really should be on Instagram. And the truth is you should be where your audience are, and you should be where on the channels that are going to help you achieve your objectives. So think about your use of social media in a strategic way in the context of your marketing strategy. They're just channels to reach audiences. And as I say, you know, these are the current stats for the use of different social media platforms in the UK at the moment. And it is helpful to know this for context, but I would just reiterate, you know, your use of social media is not talking to this huge homogenous mass of millions of people. You want to find your communities and find your people on each of these platforms. Okay. And this is just a bit of insight into the way and the trends in terms of the way people are using social media over time. And as you can see, particularly amongst adults, Facebook does really still dominate. But I would sound a note of caution with this. You know, it's more important to be where your audience are than to be where the most number of people are. So it's helpful to know that for context. But again, think about the platforms that your audiences will be using. So now this is Dolly, who's here to remind us. A lot of what I'm going to go on to talk about is kind of principles about the ways that you can use social media that kind of work across the board and apply across the board. But Dolly's here to teach us and to remind us that, you know, you really do need to tailor your content and tailor the way that you use social media to the particular platform that you're on. The types of content that you'll put out on Facebook won't be the same as the content that you put out on Instagram, for example. Having said that, there are some principles that we can apply across the board to the way that we use social media. So I thought it would be quite helpful to just talk through these with you today. So I would really recommend that you are clear on your time commitments. Now, every platform, particularly if it's new to you, is going to take an investment of time. Social media isn't something that you can leap straight in to, here's my book, buy my book. You will need to invest some of your time up front. And as I'm sure a lot of you know, there is nothing that can be the huge time suck that social media is. So I would really encourage you to be clear in advance and be quite disciplined about how much time you're prepared to spend on this. You know, your priority is writing. Some people like to give it an hour a day. Some people like to spend only half an hour a day and then have a bit of a block of half a day every week. When I say that you need to allow time for research, learning and development, I don't mean anything kind of formal or onerous. I just mean spending time having a look at what's working, having a look at the kind of latest best practice and what other people are doing well. Social media best practice changes all the time. Things like, you know, the length of video that's performing particularly well on any channel. You can have that down, and then, you know, a month later it will have changed. So you just need to kind of get into the mindset that learning and development and research is just part of the way that you use social media. Do give yourself space to have fun. Join communities, pay attention, have conversations. You know, it's not a space to be kind of really formal and polished. And I'll talk a bit more about this in a few slides' time. You know, I would really encourage you to use platforms, find a way of using platforms that you will enjoy and that will absolutely shine through in the content that you put out there and the way that you interact with people. And particularly if using social media is new to you, do take the time to use one or two channels well and then build on that. You will find it's much more effective and a much more efficient use of your time to really focus on one or two channels and spend a bit of time building relationships, building your community on those channels, than if you feel like you should be on everything and you spread yourself too thinly and you really don't give anything the investment of time that it needs to be effective. So I'd really encourage you to pick channels and start with one or two that are going to work well for you. So think about the author brand personality that you are going to be conveying and communicating in your use of social media. So this is, I do a lot of work with authors on kind of establishing and defining and pinning down their author brand. And it's important to be really clear that it's real, it's authentic. This is you, but it is a version of you. I know a lot of authors really, to start with, really don't like to think of themselves as a brand, but I think it's quite a helpful way to both stay focused on the version of you that is going to be interesting and engaging to your audiences, but also it protects you. A lot of us draw on, you know, maybe difficult or challenging things that have happened to us in our writing. And that's, you know, that's great. That brings kind of that power to what we write, but we might not want to explicitly share that personal type of content with the public. So kind of establishing what your author brand persona is going to be, make sure that you've kind of cordoned off the version of yourself that you're going to be sharing with the public, and established that you're going to, you know, if there's certain elements of yourself that you want to keep private, you've really thought about that in advance, and make sure you do that before, for example, you find yourself in an interview situation. You don't want to kind of stumble into answering questions and talking about things that you subsequently wish you hadn't. So I think it can be quite a useful concept for those reasons. But it is a version of you, so it is really important to be human, be real. It's good to be vulnerable on social media, but as I say, this kind of controlled vulnerable, where you've established what it is you're happy to share, and what you want to keep private well in advance. And please don't worry about being too perfect. I know that a lot of authors, again, particularly if using social media is new to you, kind of worry about, what if I get it wrong? What if I say the wrong things? And actually, you know, being too polished can actually be less engaging. And I've got a couple of examples here for you that hopefully just act as a bit of reassurance on this point. So the first one is this isn't an author, this is actually a farm shop that shared a post that was a video. They were reopening after COVID, and they'd created this really lovely polished video of all the safety measures that they put in place. And then they shared another post of all the outtakes from making that video, and the outtakes video got about 10 times the engagement and reach. And then I've shared an article about something called the pratfall effect, which is really about the benefit to brands across the board, if you're happy to share your flaws and even your mistakes, how effective that can be in marketing and promotion. So hopefully that just acts as a bit of reassurance that really perfection isn't even what you're aiming for. So please don't worry about being perfect. So you've had to think about your audiences. You've had to think about the channels that you are going to use to reach your audiences. And you've really had a bit of a think about, okay, I think these are the social media platforms that are going to help me reach my target audience. So I would really recommend that before you leap into promoting yourself, you spend some time on that platform as a user, get to know the community, the tone, what's working for other people. Strike up conversations, ask people questions. People love to be asked questions. Take advantage of insight wherever you find it. And then once you feel like you've got a sense of the culture and communities that you want to engage with on that social media platform, then make your content plan and think about what you're going to share, how often, remembering that you always need to be building in time for responding and commenting on other people's posts. So for example, if you've identified Instagram, you'll be thinking about what you want to share on your grid. So ideally at least once a day, a nice attractive image for your grid. But then you can share on Instagram stories less formal content, less polished content, and you might feel comfortable doing that more frequently. And make a plan for that once you've got a sense of the communities that you want to interact with, and how you want to use this social media platform. These are really just kind of introduction slides to Twitter and Instagram. I'm not going to go through these in a lot of detail, just in the interest of time, but you will, these slides will be available to you. So if you're very new to using Twitter or Instagram, you can have a bit of a look at these and think about how you might like to use those platforms. I'm going to spend a little bit of time thinking about Facebook, though, because I think it is worth just considering how you use Facebook. And this is what I mean when I say, you know, don't treat a social media platform like you're talking to all those people at once. it is a good idea to have an author page on Facebook, but treat that almost like your shop front. Don't expect content that you share through your author page to reach huge numbers of people, particularly if you're just sharing it organically, which means you're not putting budget behind it. The way Facebook is going is very much encouraging you to use groups, and groups can be a really nice way, if you think back to your target audiences that were based around a particular special interest. Facebook groups can be a really effective way of promoting your work to people with that particular interest. Just a brief note, Facebook advertising, it's possible to spend small amounts of money. And in fact, I would, if putting some budget behind the way you use Facebook is what you want to do, I would encourage you to start small. And with a lot of these things, it's a good idea to put small budgets behind things and test them and see how they're working. If you want to use Facebook advertising and you want to target audiences according to geographical location, gender or age, it's relatively straightforward. So that's something that you could do yourself. If you want to start getting into Facebook advertising, gets very, very sophisticated in terms of targeting people's interests. And that's definitely something you can do, but it's more involved. So that's just a bit of a note. What the other thing it's worth thinking about is go back to the point about what you want people to do. So what is your objective, and really do bear that in mind with all of this. Maybe you want people to buy a book, but is it actually better to ask them to go and sign up to your mailing list so you can have that longevity, you can build that longer term relationship with them, and think about that. But as I say, if you're wanting to thank you, if you're wanting to use Facebook in a way that you don't have to put budget behind, groups is really what I'd recommend you try. So think about the target audiences that you've identified, which groups they will be in, and spend a bit of time researching these in advance, because you need to put that investment of time in. None of these are a sort of quick fix. You can't leap into a community group and say, hey, buy my book. You really do want to join the right groups. So it's worth, being really selective, doing your research, looking at different groups that might be places where your target audiences gather. And really kind of looking at the groups that are going to work for you, rather than joining hundreds and then not engaging in a way that's going to be effective. And also, I would again here really encourage you to think about quality over quantity. If there's a couple of hundred people who are going to be really into what you're doing, that is better than a group with hundreds and thousands of people in who are just not going to be that into it. This is something that Mark Zuckerberg said only a couple of months ago. So this is really about, the algorithm has changed recently to prioritize groups, and it's going to be changing more over the coming months. So this is something that's only going to get more important in terms of the way that you use Facebook. So you've got your objectives, you've got your target audiences, you know how you're going to reach them. The next thing to do in your strategy is think about the key messages and the content that are going to really make this specific audience sit up and take notice of you, your books, and you as an author. And this is where you think about your key messages. So what are the things that you absolutely want these audiences to go away knowing about you? And again, when you're putting together your marketing strategy, it's worth kind of pausing here and spending a little bit of time on this. What stands out about your books? What is different about you as a writer? What will the experience of reading your book be like for a reader? And you also really do want to make sure that you've got the important practical information in your key messages. Sorry, I'm just going to have a look. What I'll do is I'll any questions that you're asking as we go along. I think Francesca's going to be looking at these, and then she's going to gather those and ask me at the end. So I'll kind of wait, and I'll answer your questions at the end, and we'll try and get to as many of those as possible. So yeah, think about the practical information, you know, when you're in a, particularly if it's a kind of live video situation or an interview situation, it's amazing how often the most important information just goes out of your head, and you come out of doing a video and realize that you didn't say the name of your book or the date it's released. Or so be really clear about, these are the things that somebody who consumes this piece of promotion absolutely has to go away and know about me, and that will shape what you're doing and the way you put together your content. And then particularly for online promotion and marketing, really spending some time on thinking about the types of content that will work well for you. So I would really encourage you to think about the rule of thirds. And this is essentially a guiding principle about the way that you use particularly social media. And you should be spending an absolute maximum of a third of your time promoting yourself overtly and your work. Another third of your time can be spent on content which is kind of related to your writing life and related to your books, but it's really just kind of engaging content, personal stories, and I've got some ideas for you about the types of content that you can put out that will serve this purpose. And then at least a third of your time you should be spending interacting with other people, responding to other people, commenting on other people's posts, sharing each other's posts. And that is the case no matter how long you've been on social media, if you're really wanting to grow a following on these platforms. And when you're thinking about the types of content that you want to put out, I would really encourage you, you know, as I say, your priority is writing. Your priority is not spending 3 hours putting together a Facebook post. So think about the things that you do in your daily life that really tie into your author brand and how you can use those to create content. So, you know, if you're somebody whose books contain a lot of content set in the outdoors, there's a real theme about being in the outdoors, and you're somebody who walks your dog every day, you know, that's a nice place to find content. You can just share a picture and share your reflections from that walk. You can share the lovely kind of glimpse behind the curtain content, which is always really engaging, about the process of writing and where you are in your writing journey. Always, as I say, bearing in mind that author brand, the principles of, you know, making sure that it's a version of yourself and you're not sharing things that you're not comfortable with. So think about the things in your life that you do anyway, and the ways that you can turn those into your social media content, so you're not having to give loads of additional time to this. And be really consistent in the types of content that you put out. Think about, you know, this is what I'm going to put out. It's going to be, you know, a picture from my walk, and it's going to be a reflection on how my writing's going that day, and stick to that. Don't start sharing content willy-nilly on, you know, your whole life, warts and all, because that will get quite confusing for readers and potential readers. The idea of all of this really is to give your readers a sense of what it's going to be like to come into your world and read one of your books. So you do want to give them a consistent experience. So these are some ideas. I don't want to overwhelm you. I would say this is a menu, not a to-do list. These are just ideas, if you think these might work for you, of things that you might want to create in terms of your content. one thing that's not on here actually that works really well, particularly kind of in the earlier stages, is asking questions. And that can work particularly well if you are using Facebook groups as a way of promoting yourself, going in and asking people questions. You know, most people now who are on Facebook are on a group based around the location where they live, at least one, sometimes multiple. And if you've joined a group according to the geographical location where your book's set, for example, I worked with an author who one of her books, the characters had to get from one place to another, and she'd gone onto this Facebook group and asked a question about if I wanted to get from here to here, how would I do it and how long would it take me? And she got some fantastic engagement, because, you know, that's the sort of thing that if you live in a particular place, you know, you've always got an opinion on things like that, and you like to share it. And it's a much cleverer way of using social media. Rather than saying, buy my book, you are implicitly saying, you know, I'm writing a book and it's set in the place where you live, you're going to love it, but you're not kind of turning people off in the way that too much overtly promotional content will. So think about questions, think about whether you want to run promotions and discounts and competitions. That can work really well. Think about if you've got something coming up, you know, that's, and we will talk about book launches specifically in a little while. You know, how you can tease and trail things in advance. Behind the scenes, as I say, that sort of glimpse behind the curtain content can work really well. Who can you collaborate with? You know, think about your target audiences and the other people that might appeal to the same target audience. So that might be authors, but it might be completely different people and organizations. And how can you kind of work together? Share and amplify others. You know, that's always worth doing, and people will return the favor. Always credit people. And you know, people will do the same for you, and it's part of that kind of support and shared community. Think about seasonal and trending content. Do think about going live. I've got a couple of slides on how engaging video content is. You know, you could, if you're brave and there are people that you really trust, allow others to do takeovers from your accounts if that's something that interests you. So these are all things, as I say, please don't feel overwhelmed by that. That's not things that you should be doing or you have to do. Those are just some ideas if you want to think about the types of content that you can use in your online book promotion. And as I say, video is probably the most engaging type of content that there is at the moment. And I've worked with a lot of authors who I know it can feel daunting to a lot of people. And if, as with all of this activity, if it's something that you really just hate the thought of doing it, then absolutely don't. But if you fancy giving it a go, I really would encourage you to try. Remember, it's better if it's not perfectly polished. You know, sharing that authentic version of yourself, you know, is what people like. That's what's engaging. That's what's interesting. You know, if you're at a certain point in your journey, you know, sometimes people feel like, oh, who am I to create video content? Why is anyone going to be interested in what I've got to say? And actually, the fact that you're at a certain point in your journey where, you know, maybe things, you know, you're not selling as many copies as you'd like to, and you know, you don't feel like you've kind of reached the place that you want to get to. That's more interesting than someone who's absolutely, you know, got everything perfect and polished. And so do consider giving video content a go. Most social media platforms now will let you go live. And again, that can feel really scary and really daunting, especially like today when you've got 176 authors watching you. But honestly, the more you do it, the more comfortable you become. And I think a lot of authors find that they become much more comfortable with lives more quickly than you'd think. So I, you know, I'm not saying you have to at all, but it is definitely worth thinking about video content because it is so engaging. And as we said, you know, when you come to putting together your marketing strategy, think about the resources. And by this, I primarily mean time. Your time is by far your most precious resource because you're writing books, and that's the most important thing. So you do want to be clear. There's no point you know, setting yourself up to do all this activity that you just don't have the time to do. It's much better to be realistic about how much time you've got, and then you can prioritize the activity that's going to get you to fulfilling your objectives. And then the next stage of your marketing strategy is really to put together your tactical plan and timescales. And this is where you kind of really pin down what it is you're going to do at each stage in the process. And it's really worth spending some time on this at the outset. This is how I would format my tactical plan and timescales. I think when Francesca and I went through the next slide, it's somehow ended up all over the place, but I will tidy this up for the version that I send through to you, and hopefully you can see enough here to get a sense of what I mean here. So I really would go into this amount of detail in my tactical plan and timescales, because I don't know about you, but kind of the promotional and marketing side of things is a very different headspace to writing a book. And doing this, I almost think of my tactical plan and timescales as a set of instructions that I'm writing for future me, so she doesn't have to get her head into this place in this much detail again. And it means that when you come to do the activity, your use of time is much more efficient, because you know exactly what you're going to be doing, you know exactly the types of content that you're going to be using. So I think it might feel onerous doing this at the outset, but it does pay dividends in the long term. And then the last element of your marketing strategy is really about evaluating and refining what's worked. As I said, a lot of the of the activity that you will find is most effective for you is where you do something a little bit different, where you do something a bit innovative. And the risk of doing that, sometimes it'll be really effective and sometimes you'll get absolute tumbleweed. Believe me, it happens to all of us. And that's absolutely fine. It's the important thing is that you track that, and that if something hasn't worked, that you don't do it again. Likewise, if something's been really effective for you, you need to track that, and so you can replicate it. If something hasn't worked, it may be that you just ditch it. Or it may be that you refine it and do it a bit differently. And this will be the case for so much of your activity, whether it's paid for or not paid for, or organic types of content that you're putting out there. And I really would advise you to track what's working, the engagement that you get, the reach that you get with all of these different types of content that you try. The other reason to kind of evaluate and refine as you go is that you will learn about your audiences. And if you think back to when we were talking about kind of what do you know about these target audiences and how can you bring that knowledge into the way that you choose channels and the types of content and key messages that you use when talking to those target audiences, everything that you do as part of this process will give you more insight that you can then feed back in. And it really is about continual learning and improvement in all this activity. So I was going to do a few slides as well, just specifically on managing an online book launch, which I know a lot of people have had to do over the past year. And in some ways, I think an online book launch can be even more effective than an in-person book launch. So, you know, it may be that we're able to do more in-person book launches again next year, but it may be that, you know, no matter what happens, you want to bring in an element of this, just because it means that a broader range of people can come to a book launch if they don't have to come to a particular venue. So what I would say about planning your online book launch is really do link it to your marketing strategy and make it work for you. I'm always really surprised when I see online book launches where people have just kind of replicated that, kind of having a glass of wine with their friends and saying, hooray, my book's been launched. And that's fine. And you know, if that's what you want and you just want to have a really lovely evening, then that's great. But if you want your book launch to contribute to sales or the other marketing objectives that you've set yourself, then you really do need to think about it a bit more strategically than that. Have a think about the platform that you want to use. Now, I've seen really good book launches on all of these platforms: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Zoom, YouTube. You know, you can use any of those. What I would say is select the platform that you use based on your target audiences, where you're going to be able to attract them to relatively easily, but also what you're comfortable with. You know, you do want to be feeling comfortable and as relaxed as possible during your book launch, and getting to know a whole new set of tech isn't really ideal. So think about your audiences, but also think about where you're comfortable when you're planning your launch. Who do you want to be involved in your launch? Now, it's the perfect opportunity to collaborate, to really recruit advocates and get people on board. Think about who you want to be involved in the launch itself. So if you're going live, or even if you're pre-recording some elements of the launch, you know, do you want someone to share a conversation with you as part of that launch? Do you want to have a sort of interview format, a Q&A format? And who do you want to invite to be part of that with you? And really here, think about who is going to draw in people from your target audiences. So this is all about broadening the appeal and broadening the reach of your launch, and working with people who are going to, you know, help you spread the word, and sharing the fact that your launch is happening on their channels, attracting their networks to come and attend your launch as well. So who are the people that are going to will help you reach the target audiences that you've identified? And as I said, this can be authors. It can work really nicely to kind of share launches with other authors. But it can be a completely different type of person or organisation. I worked with a brilliant author whose books, one of the main characters worked for the Fell Rescue Association, and as part of her launch, she interviewed people from the Fell Rescue organisation and shared that. Which was a really nice element to bring into it, you know, and then that organisation shares the fact that this launch is happening. This author is having a launch, and if you're interested in the Fell Rescue organisation, you'll probably really like this book, and it's all adds to that. The ways that you can reach your target audiences in spaces other than the kind of book loving community spaces. And the marketing term is cut through. You'll often hear that term, which just means kind of in that really crowded marketplace of all of those different authors and all of those different books. This is the message that gets heard, and this is the message that people kind of sit up and take notice of. You can make a media pack. So quite often for a book launch, there'll be a media pack, but, you know, and that would be interesting content about you, interesting content about the book itself. But think about sharing your media pack more widely than just with the traditional media. You know, think about bloggers you might want to work with. Think about other people that can really help you drum up interest and excitement in the launch. In the lead up to it. And I think it's quite useful to think about your launch in terms of before, during and after. So yes, it's an event, but really think about everything that you can do in advance, you know, lovely behind the scenes content, you know, an author preparing for the launch of their book. How do you feel, you know, sharing some of your emotions around the preparation can be very engaging. do you want to target people to review your books? And there are lots of ways to do that, book blogs, NetGalley, but then do you want to, again, think about that a little bit more laterally? Invite, if your book is a history book, invite a local history blogger to review your book and put that on their blog. Think about, again, ways that you can reach your audiences, not in purely related to those book community spaces. And one really important thing I would advise you to do, and this is more related to the tech, but also if people are going to be kind of jumping in and out and joining you, is to test everything in advance. And that's to make sure it runs smoothly, but also I think it has such an effect on your state of mind and how relaxed and confident you feel, because it is important to be strategic about your book launch, but ultimately you do want to enjoy it and you want to be able to relax and have a nice time. And I think if you've tested everything and you know what you're doing with the tech, it's so much easier to do that. So during the launch itself, there are any number of different elements and components you can bring in. And I would encourage you, again, to think creatively. I think, there'll be things that you could specifically bring in that relate to your book that will make it interesting for the audiences who are likely to be interested in reading your book. And I think it's always engaging if there's something a little bit different and new that an author's brought to their launch. But these are some tried and tested, really nice elements that you can bring in. So, do you want the audience to be able to ask you questions, either live or in advance? Do you want to invite a guest to interview you or be interviewed together? Again, with all of this stuff, think about what will appeal to your target audiences. What I would really recommend you do is think about at least one element of audience participation in your launch. So, excuse me, sorry, not necessarily for the people who are going to be joining you as part of the launch, but someone just watching along at home. What can they do? Can they make a particular drink and they sit with you and have a cocktail as they're watching the launch? Is there a question that you want to ask your audience to answer, and they can answer in the chat and participate in that way? And do remember to build into your launch different elements that you can then use as content afterwards. So be thinking about the types of content that you want to be posting, a week, a month, 6 months later, in terms of reflecting back on your launch. What are the sorts of things that I want to be gathering? Do you want to talk to the people who've come along and just get them to share their reflections with you? Whatever that might be, just think about it in the longer term. And with so much of this stuff, I would always say milk it. These are all opportunities. A book launch is a fantastic event, but it's also a fantastic source of content way beyond the launch itself. So, testimonials, experiences of people who've come along, you could clip the videos that you create, or even if you've gone live, you can create short clips from that you then share later on. Again, with a lot of this stuff, even if it's reviews or if it's how things have gone on the launch, the way that you frame it can make a real difference to how engaging that content is. So rather than just saying, I got this review, you can say, I'm just, this review has made me feel so happy. Share the fact that you're reading a review whilst you're drinking your morning coffee. Just give it some context that makes it a lot more personal, that brings in and engages your audience by sharing your own emotional response. And your book launch will be an emotional experience for you, and thinking about the elements of that you are happy to share with your audience on that event itself, but also, as I say, well beyond, can be very engaging. And again, elements of behind the scenes, you know, if you want to get someone to kind of take a few photographs of you during the launch, or whatever that might look like. People love a kind of, okay, we've been to this launch, we've seen this launch, we've got really invested and engaged in this author, and now we're getting this glimpse of what happened behind the scenes. That can work really well. So that's what I would encourage you to think about and plan when you're putting together your own book launch, particularly, as I say, if you're going to be doing that online, as so many people are at the moment. This was just to share with you, if you'd like to work with me, I've got a bit of a discount for December and January, so please do email me. I work with authors one-to-one to do coaching and support and mentoring with your own marketing and book promotion. If you've got a book launch coming up that you want us to kind of work together to really make that work for you. The other thing that I can do is I've got something called a marketing MOT. If you are an author who's already doing some book marketing and promotional work, and you just want quite a sort of quick review of what's working, and we have, as part of that, we have an hour's one-to-one session where we generate some fresh ideas and think about how you can kind of complement and build on that. That's a really nice way that you can just do that relatively quickly. So I'd really love to work with you to help you find readers who are just gonna love and enjoy your work. So please do drop me an email if that's something that you would be interested in doing. Please do sign up to my mailing list. As we were saying, I always have to kind of practice what I preach with these things. So if you would like a copy of all these slides, then please do go sign up to my mailing list. That's my website, and I'll send you all of these slides. I know that there's been a huge amount of content that we've got through today. And if you want to be able to look back and kind of reflect on that with a little bit more time to digest it, then yeah, please do sign up to the mailing list, and I'll send you the slides and you can do that. So managed to do that we've got about 15 minutes for questions. Anybody like to have a question? I think Francesca might leap back on now and join me, but I can have a look as well.
Sorry, my headphones got stuck in my head, and so I was trying to pull it off while I was sorting things out.
Shall I close down the slides so we can?
And then we'll be zoomed out quite a bit. Thank you so much, Anna. That was a real whistle-stop jam-packed, so much information, and I can see so many lovely comments in the chat. Yeah, totally inspiring, Anna. Thank you so much. But as we've been going through, I've been collecting the questions, and there were a lot. So
okay.
I'll pick one. Bonnie Hawkins said, "Do you work with illustrators?" Which I think will follow on from your last slide. As well as authors and writers.
Yeah, so I do. I work with any creative people in any discipline, basically. So I've worked with filmmakers, jewellery makers. I do primarily work with authors, but yes, is the short answer to that.
And we had a question in advance from Katerina Johnson, and she says, how important is it as an author to design an online marketing strategy if the publisher you signed with is also running a marketing campaign? If an author does their own marketing campaign alongside the publisher's one, is that something the publisher would generally encourage?
Yeah, I think it varies a lot, to be honest. What I definitely say is in the interest of it being consistent, you know, I was talking about the importance of, with your author brand, you want to give your readers and potential readers a consistent experience. So what I would say is talk to the publicist, you know, really have those conversations and make sure you're on the same page. You know, they're a professional person who, you know, knows what they're doing. So, you know, run your ideas past them, see what they would welcome. It may be in these days of incredibly stretched budgets and resources all across the board that they'll, you know, really welcome the fact that you're going to go out and do some of your own promotional work. But the most important thing is that it's consistent with whatever they've got planned, and it will vary massively. So I would just say, have the conversation, build that relationship, and make sure you're on the same page with it all.
Lovely. A question from Vanessa Potter that we may have covered, but you might want to give a little bit more detail. How do you actually drive people to your website or Instagram or Twitter to sign up to the mailing list and get the
that's a really good question. So it's all about that kind of, how do you start from scratch? And what I would make sure you do, if that's the case and you're really wanting to kind of start to build your following, is when I was talking about key messages and including quite practical information in your key messages a lot of the time, that would definitely be an example of that. So if you're wanting, if your objective essentially is to drive people to your website and get people signed up to your mailing list, then when you're doing all that work, so, you know, targeting people through different Facebook groups, targeting people using different hashtags on Twitter and Instagram, for example, any you know, marketing and promotional content that you're putting out, make sure that you include in that, go to my website, sign up to my mailing list, and this is why. This is why you will want to. So think about your incentive. As I said, I think, you know, freebies can be great, but I think there can be sometimes a little bit too much focus on freebies. So think about, you know, if I'm really talking to my ideal reader, somebody that I'm really targeting quite carefully here, what is the sort of thing that they will love? And quite often it's, you know, insight, information, lovely little nuggets into your research processes and information that you've discovered in your research. You know, exclusive first looks at that can work really well. So yeah, I would just make sure that that's just absolutely front and center in your key messages in all of the promotional activity that you do, is go to my website, sign up to my mailing list, and this is why you want to do that. And kind of, yeah, make sure it runs through everything that you do. But that's a really good question. That's a really important thing to bear in mind.
Another one from Patricia Murphy. She asks, how often should you send out newsletters? Is it better to do quarterly, for example, so you're not cluttering people's inboxes?
Yeah, you'll get so many different answers on this. I think, to be honest, I think there is more of a move. I'm definitely hearing more people concerned about people feeling spammed by a lot of different content. So some people will tell you that best practice with staying in contact with your mailing list is much more frequent than that. But I think essentially the most important thing when thinking about frequency for your contact with your mailing list, whether that's a newsletter or whatever else you want to do, is what's sustainable for you and what can you build into your schedule that is not going to start to feel like a massive pain. So I absolutely think quarterly is fine. If that is the time that you've got that you can comfortably give to that work, and it's not going to infringe too much on your writing, and it's not going to become something that, you know, what you don't really want with any of this is for it to start to feel like a huge chore and a huge stress. It's just doing enough that it will be effective, but not too much that it's going to start taking time and effort away from your writing. So I think it varies, and I think it needs to be a combination of what your audience will be happy with and what you can sustainably commit to. And then it's just about being really clear with your audience what they can expect. You know, if what they can expect is a newsletter every quarter, then just tell them that, and then they know, and that's absolutely fine.
Brilliant. I can see a lot of comments in the chat saying it's frozen, and I feel like that's my fault that I've joined the session and I've broken it. But hopefully everyone can still hear us, and this will be on the recording, so you'll be able to rewatch. A question from Kate O'Hearn. She says, when trying to set up a platform and publicity that's for children's books aged 8 to 12 years old, how can you achieve focused communication with young readership that is safe for everyone?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So a lot of the time, if you write for children and young people, you won't be targeting the children and young people themselves. You'll be kind of using intermediary channels. So sometimes that will be targeting parents. Sometimes that will be targeting school librarians, for example, other librarians. So I think in particular, I know today's session is really focused on online channels and on online ways of marketing and promoting your books, and you obviously have to be really cautious and really careful with targeting children online. So just think about what we were saying about thinking creatively and thinking laterally about the ways that you can reach your audience. So who will help you get there, whether it's parents, librarians, it might be other groups and organizations that you can work with that work with younger people. And just thinking about that a little bit more laterally. When you can do more face-to-face events again, it may be that kind of working with schools and speaking to children directly in schools, for example, is something that you could look at. But yeah, it certainly in the short term, while we're talking about online book promotion, I would think about the intermediary channels that you could use.
Lovely. And Jacqueline Mitchell asks for general advice. What if you have different identities as a writer, e.g. fiction and non-fiction?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I've worked with a few authors where we've kind of tried to untangle this about, people that write more than one genre, for example. And I think essentially a really helpful way to think about that can be by audience. So think about the sort of Venn diagram of the audiences for those for your work, and where there is loads of crossover and where you can see that these different types of writing will appeal to similar audiences. You can kind of create one author brand, one author platform, and just kind of you will target different people in different ways. A lot of this is about making sure that the messages you use with particular target audiences will engage and resonate with those audiences. But I know one author, for example, she might even be on this, a friend of mine who's an author who writes for children, as also writes these amazing kind of monologues for performance. So she's a wonderful children's writer, but she also writes these really violent, sweary monologues. So that's an example of a case where I'd probably recommend you keep those things pretty separate. But for the vast majority of authors, there will be a lot of crossover in terms of the audiences who'll be interested in the different types of writing that you do. And then it's just a case of making sure that the promotional activity that targets particular groups is really focused on those groups, but you can direct them to the same platform.
Lovely. And Claire Fuller has a question. How far in advance do you think you should start promoting a book online? And I know there was another question. Sorry, I've forgotten who asked it, but it was similar. How far in advance should you start promoting your book launch?
Yeah. Specifically a book launch.
Oh, Claire Fuller asked about your book sort of upcoming for publication, and somebody else in the chat who I've forgotten asked how far you should start talking about your book launch.
So a book launch, I would be trailing, well, now everything's online. I would probably be thinking, maybe 2 to 3 months in advance is plenty. Kind of enough time so people can get it in their diary and they're not doing something else, but not so much that they'll sign up to it and then forget about it, basically, is the window that you're looking for. And there's all sorts of lovely things. Say if you give yourself a 3-month lead in time, as I say, you can really kind of be using the upcoming book launch as a focus for so much of what you do, and it's a lovely way to kind of invite people into that whole experience that you're having as an author. A more general question about kind of when is it worth starting to build your author profile and your author platform in advance of having a book out there, that's completely up to you. So I've worked with some authors who, you know, don't have an agent yet, don't, you know, and they want to go down a traditional publishing route, but they, you know, it's very early days for them. And depending on how much of yourself you're happy to share and how much of your author journey and the experiences that you're having, it can be so interesting. And as I say, often that kind of, you know, the journey and inviting people to share that with you is more interesting than a massively successful author saying, you know, look, I've sold another 1 million books, you know, because it's much more emotionally resonant and people can really kind of join you in that experience. So if that's something you're interested in sharing, you know, and it's not just the emotional side of things, it's the research, it's the practical side. You know, I've worked with an author who's got 4 children who fits writing in to that life. And, you know, she really built her sort of early career profile around how to fit writing into a already very busy life. So depending on the types of things you want to share, you can be building your profile, you know, years in advance of actually having a book out. It's completely up to you, and it's a very personal decision based on what you're comfortable with sharing.
And we've had a couple of questions in the chat about the GDPR implications for collecting emails for the mailing list. Do you have any advice about that?
Yeah, the main thing you need to bear in mind, you know, where I did the list of the platforms that you can go and use if you want to set up a mailing list, if that's not something that you've done yet, then I'm fairly certain that most, if not all of those, will manage the GDPR process for you. So the most important thing is that with every communication, you are giving people the opportunity to unsubscribe. And if they unsubscribe, that is acted on. So you're not sending stuff to people who don't want to receive it. If you have a really old historical mailing list of people that signed up pre-GDPR, that probably doesn't apply to many people now, then you might need to ditch quite a lot of those email addresses. So it is worth, if that's the situation, it's worth kind of looking into that in a bit more detail. But if you're starting from scratch now, the most important thing is that everyone who you're sending emails to has opted in and they want to receive them and they know what they're going to be receiving, and that with every communication they have the opportunity to opt out. But I'm pretty sure that if you use one of the platforms that I recommended that manages that unsubscribe, that person isn't sent subsequent emails processed for you.
Brilliant. And I think just time for one more question, even though we're on the time limit. It's cropped up a couple of times in the chat, people asking how they can use Goodreads. And do you have a couple of tips for using Goodreads for promoting your work?
Yeah, I think, you know, it is worth being on there. I think it's worth bearing in mind that for most of people, Goodreads is a platform for readers, and that's useful context to bear in mind when you're using Goodreads. But yeah, definitely, you know, if that's a platform that you enjoy being on, that you want to connect with readers and potential readers on there, then really making your profile as strong as you can on there is probably the biggest recommendation I would give you. So go on there, spend a bit of time on your profile, make it as engaging as possible. There's all sorts of ways that you can share this kind of insight that we've been talking about, a bit of a kind of glimpse behind the curtain into your writing process and your writing life. So you can answer questions, you can invite questions from readers, and sort of building it. As with all of these platforms, it's about building relationships and building communities. So yeah, absolutely, that's something that you can do.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anna. I think that's all we've got time for today in terms of extra questions. But so you covered so many and everybody has really enjoyed your session. There's so much information. they've got so much to take away and go and put into action for their online promotion. Just a couple of things for me to wrap up.
I hope it wasn't overwhelming. I hope it was helpful.
This is the last session of the SWA at Home Festival, so fill your boots while you can this week. Tomorrow we have a session on how to protect yourself and your characters. And on Thursday we have 2 events, one on the role of literary agents and one final afternoon tea of the year with Dean Atter. You can book your place on the website and I'll post the link in the chat now. And we also have a series of local group online meetups taking place this month and next month and beyond. So do register for your nearest one if you'd like to meet SWA members in your area. Just a reminder that if you would like to donate to the Authors Contingency Fund, the link is in the chat, and we will be sharing a recording of this session and the accompanying slides and Anna's contact details. So that will come through to you this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Anna, again for that marathon talk. I don't know how we talked for an hour and a half. But thank you so much. And take care, everybody.
Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.